Republicans celebrate at the White House after passing their tax plan, but now they have to live with it and run on it. Question is, will that plan backfire on the GOP? Also, a homecoming for the New York Islanders. We're going to show you the plan for the Isles to move back to the island. Then Governor Cuomo likes to take credit when things go well on the subways. Remember when the 2nd Avenue subway opened? But when things go south, it is a whole different story and blame game. Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman, in tonight for Richard French. President Trump and congressional Republicans at the White House today celebrating the passage of their tax bill.
These are the people right behind me. They've worked so long, so hard. It's been an amazing experience, I have to tell you. Hasn't been done in 34 years, but actually really hasn't been done because we broke every record. It's the largest, I always say the most massive, but it's the largest tax cut in the history of our country.
That tax cut plan passed both the House and the Senate with absolutely no Democratic votes. But in the House, 12 Republicans voted no, and 9 of them hail from New York and New Jersey. Here are some of the highlights of the tax plan. It limits deductions for state, local, and property taxes up to $10,000. That's why it got so few Republican votes from our region. It keeps the current 7 tax brackets and lowers the rate for the top bracket by more than 2 points down to 37%, though cuts on the lower end expire and then eventually rise. The bill permanently cuts the corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%. And it scraps part of Obamacare, and that could leave 13 million people without insurance and make premiums for everybody else go up. Earlier today, I spoke about the politics of the tax bill with ABC News political director Rick Klein. Rick, all throughout 2017, we saw the divides in the congressional Republicans in Congress. We even saw it on the health care bill, but this tax bill never seemed to be in doubt. We never heard from the Freedom Caucus, despite the bill adding to the deficit. No real arm twisting in the Senate, although there were some real estate perks that benefited some senators. Why did this go so smoothly for the GOP?
Well, the one thing that seems to unite the modern Republican Party is tax cuts. And you saw, didn't matter if you were a moderate or a conservative, a red state, blue state, for the most part, you were on board on this. I do think it's telling, though, that 0 Democrats voted for it. And in fact, 12 Republicans, mainly from California, New York, and New Jersey, voted against it in the House of Representatives. So some signs of the splits, but Republicans were able to rally behind at least this one thing to close out the year.
Was it the policy itself, or did Republican leadership in both chambers handle this differently than they've handled other bills?
I think it's the policy. I don't think you could have handled differently Obamacare and changed the schisms, the rifts that made themselves evident. But I think, look, Republicans feel strongly that this tax cut will be popular with the American people, will help the economy, will be a political winner, an economic winner across the board. That's really the mantra of the party. And I think you see the split. Democrats just think the opposite. They don't believe what Republicans believe when it comes to this bill.
I keep thinking back to some of the complaints we heard from Republicans after the Affordable Care Act was passed in 2010, that the bill was fully partisan, it was rushed through without a lot of time to read it, no committee hearings, kickbacks that benefited specific lawmakers and regions, wasn't popular in the polls, and it came leading into a bad midterm environment. You hearing or sensing any concern from Republicans like that they may be facing their own pushback like Democrats did after Obamacare?
There are striking similarities, and in fact, you go look at last week's election in Alabama. There was a comparable one 7 years ago when Obamacare was on the march, and the voters in Massachusetts sent a Republican to the Senate to replace Ted Kennedy. So there's a lot of historical precedent here. I'll tell you why Republicans think it's different. They think that defending tax cuts, that 4 out of 5 Americans will pay less in taxes, will be a lot easier than defending the disruptions to the health insurance industry, the new taxes that were part of Obamacare. They feel like they're on more solid footing. But you're right, when you look at the numbers now, only about 1/3 of the country saying they think that this is a good deal for them, a good deal for the country. That is a really tall order to try to overcome those odds. Hope that the economy is humming. Hope the perceptions of President Trump change all in the next 11 months before the midterms.
We talked a lot about tax rates and the impact on individuals, but this bill also repeals the individual mandate that's part of the Affordable Care Act. How important was that to Republican elected officials, and how important do you think that is to Republican voters?
Well, it almost slipped in there, as the president himself is boasting about. But yeah, I think the idea of making some progress on Obamacare, look, the president just said that repeals Obamacare. He's not accurate about that. That is not what happens here. But 13 million Americans are estimated by the Congressional Budget Office to not have health care next year as a result of getting rid of this mandate, where you have to pay a fine, a tax essentially, if you don't obtain health insurance. That disrupts the insurance market. So if you're looking to dismantle Obamacare, getting rid of the Affordable Care Act's individual mandate is a key piece of that, but it can't be the end of the story if you want to actually repeal and replace Obamacare. Republicans realize that. In fact, they may have made more headaches for themselves when it comes to disruptions in the markets.
President Trump's already talking about a shift to infrastructure, but a lot of Republicans on the Hill are talking entitlements with potential cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, saying they have to do that to deal with the deficit, even though they just expanded that deficit with the tax bill. How tough a sell would that be for them to turn around and use the deficit as a reason to go after the safety net?
It's a great point, and I think you're going to see a divergence between congressional Republicans and the White House when it comes to that. They realize that they are not necessarily on the same page when it comes to that, but people like Speaker Ryan feel strongly that taking on entitlement reform is the next big phase of conservative governance. They may have an ally in the White House in some of those things, they may not in others.
And finally, Rick, what section of voters are you going to be looking for in polls to see their reaction to the tax bill and moving forward? Suburban voters, women, college-educated voters, all groups that went for Trump in 2016.
Yeah, I think the suburbs are going to be critical here. We've already seen that in some special election and off-year election races. But I think they also speak to some of the inequities in this tax bill. If you live in a higher tax state, if you have large deductions around state and local taxes, property taxes and the like, you may end up paying more in taxes. So the reaction to this bill, particularly as it does benefit the corporate world, that huge tax cut for corporations, frankly, people like Donald Trump, although the White House denies it with no evidence, people like Donald Trump are likely to do much better under this tax bill. How people respond to that when the president put himself out there as a champion of the working class, that's a big political question for next year.
ABC News political director Rick Klein. Always appreciate the insight and analysis, Rick. Thanks much.
Hey, thank you.
Up next, a high-level Treasury Department official tells us more about the tax plan, and then our panel is here to debate its pros and its cons.